Asbestos is a known carcinogen, and there's no safe level of exposure.
Mesothelioma is a miserable disease.
They must fight a truly global battle.
We want to demonstrate our enormous respect.
Keep up the good work. I look forward to the day when ADAO is no longer needed.
Fix it. Fix it. Everything in the world can be fixed.
Keep me in your heart for a while.
Good afternoon. No need to self-introduce because I did that this morning, so we're going to save lots of time, Linda. I am going to build on some of the presentations you heard earlier this morning from some of my other colleagues and friends, most notably Celeste, who talked a little bit about the lack of enforcement. And I want to just delve into that a bit further as we talk about enforcement of existing asbestos regulations. Specifically, I'm going to focus on what's called the NESHAP regulation, the National Emissions Standard for Hazardous Air Pollutants. And what I want you to know, for those of you who don't know this, those of us involved in the industry, this is a very basic regulation for us. But for those of you who don't know this regulation, the regulation requires an inspection for asbestos prior to any demolition or renovation project that might disturb asbestos. And that's regardless of the age of the building. Why? We've learned that this morning. Anybody want to take a guess as to why? Because we're still putting asbestos in buildings today. People don't think so, but we are. There are specific notification requirements of EPA and local jurisdictions, and there are specific abatement methods and disposal methods that are outlined in those regulations. But here's what we see from our colleagues at EPA. EPA, by its own admission, says we have pretty dismal enforcement of these existing regulations. And to make matters worse, the tremble and the rumor we hear on the ground is that EPA is still continuing to diminish their staffs, their enforcement staffs. And in fact, at the headquarters office in Washington, D.C., they might entirely eliminate all the people that work on asbestos. Not good for those of us that want to see more rigorous enforcement of existing regs. Also, I want you to understand that some of my colleagues in this industry have done their own research on the enforcement of existing regulations and how these regulations are put into place on a local level. And here's what they've said, that it appears that only a small fraction of the projects that involve asbestos are actually getting the notifications that are required by law, and that the impact of this is that people are being exposed. And that's very bad for all of us. And this is, you'll see in the footnote down there that this was a presentation just made at the EIA conference just last week. Worse yet, we had a report from the Inspector General's Office of EPA that came out late last year that said even EPA is not following their own rules. EPA at some of their Superfund sites has allowed asbestos abatement activity to go on in ways that are not in keeping with the regulatory requirements set up by this National Emissions Standard for Hazardous Air Pollutants. And in fact, the warning from the Office of the Inspector General is you need to stop this because people are being exposed, persons who are employees of EPA and employees of contractors that EPA has retained to do work at Superfund sites, specifically in the biggest case of these is at the Hanford site, are being exposed to very high levels of asbestos, airborne asbestos, and that should not happen if the regulations were followed. Well, when the enforcement vehicle actually works, here's what we get. And Celeste gave us a few cases. Let me give you another one today, and this also segues off of what my friend Andy Oberta had to say. Marco Island, Florida. This happened the work was actually started in 2005. The fine was levied in 2010. And here's what was left over. I think I might have another picture there too. Yeah, there we go. That's what was left over after this project. Let me give you just a little background on this project. This was a widening of one of the main roads on Marco Island called Collier Boulevard. And the contractor involved, and you're going to love this, Quality Enterprises. And part of the widening of Collier Boulevard involved also replacing both the water supply and the water sewer lines. And Quality Enterprises never thought a thing about testing that cement pipe to see if it might be asbestos cement pipe, and in fact it was. And the pile over there on the left is what they left behind. And in fact, what you see in the hand there is a piece of that asbestos cement pipe. It's very clear that when this material is broken up, it is friable, it releases fibers, and people can be exposed. So with that huge pile of asbestos cement pipe debris that was broken up as part of this, the city and the contractor both agreed to a fine, you see there, of $81,772. Neither one of them was required to admit any wrongdoing. They simply paid the fine. And in fact, in so doing, I can promise you that that fine is substantially less than it would have cost to actually do the job properly. So there's an encouragement, if you will, to do the job wrong. And as Celeste even pointed out, even more strongly on the OSHA side, when you negotiate these fines down, it makes sense. Just do the job the way you want to do it, pay the fine, and move on. It's a business matter. How do we fix all of this? Well, I have a couple of ideas I'll share with you about how we fix this, because rather than me just laying out the problem to you, I'd also like to propose to you that I think there are some fixes available and maybe some things that all of us in this room can do to encourage some of the fixes. We can encourage enforcement on a local level where these permits are issued. How simple is it? I think in almost all of our jurisdictions, if you go out to do a demolition project or a renovation project or a building project of any kind, you have to go to your county or your city and obtain a permit to do that. How simple would it be for the persons issuing the permit to say, oh, by the way, where's your asbestos inspection? I'm not issuing the permit until I see that. The other thing we can do is put pressure on Congress and the EPA for more realistic fines. They tell us they're limited by what's in their regulatory authority as to the size of the fine they can issue. And then I think we can push EPA for more and more awareness. Here we are today trying to spread awareness, but I think that can be done at the EPA level as well. On the local level enforcement, I've got a couple of examples of places that I would submit to you are doing it right. One is Cook County in the Chicago area, and they require an asbestos inspection for all types of projects without any exemption. It's resulted in an increased compliance in Chicago, and is coordinated with all municipalities within the Chicago area. Very nice way of doing it. We see the same kind of thing happening in New York City, where New York City says if you go to file for a demolition renovation permit, you've got to file one of two forms, an ACP-5 or an ACP-7. Asbestos Control Program is what those ACP stands for. And one is for a non-asbestos project, the other is for an asbestos project. And it simply says, we've done an asbestos investigation, and the results are either we have asbestos and we've got to deal with it, and your ACP-7 then says how you will deal with it, who the contractor is, the quantities involved, those kinds of things. This all meets the requirements of that federal NESHAP regulation. All these filings in New York, great new system they just came out with, are all done online, but you can't file online unless you're a registered provider and you are registered and licensed in the city of New York as well. Very, very good stuff. So it's being done right some places. And in fact, thinking back, let me even say to you, thinking back about doing it right, the problem with situations like the Marco Island, Florida situation is even with an enforcement and a fine, the exposures still occurred. What we really want to do is get back in front of all of that and try and increase awareness and increase enforcement before things occur so that we don't have the exposures and people unknowingly being exposed. Encouraging Congress and EPA, well, I think we can all do our part there just to keep people aware. And I can promise you that Doug and Linda and all of the volunteers at ADAO are doing their part in a huge way to make sure that our federal regulators are constantly reminded of the fact that, oh, by the way, we haven't banned asbestos, and oh, by the way, all you have to do is watch television any night of the week and see commercials for mesothelioma lawyers, and you know that it's a problem, and we need to deal with it. Awareness, well, there's a little piece here, and this is a little self-promotion, if you will, on the part of the Environmental Information Association. EPA has said, hey, we have a guidance manual that we put out in 1985, and it never has been updated since then. And they've asked the Environmental Information Association to help with a rewrite and an update of this manual, and we're in the process of doing that right now. But I worry about what might happen if there's no one in the federal office in Washington, D.C. to try and push this message further. But EPA is interested in updating their guidance on asbestos-containing material, and I will tell you this, if in fact EPA doesn't pick up the ball with this and run with it, we'll figure out a way to self-publish it together. Thank you very much.
Keep up the good work. I look forward to the day when ADAO is no longer needed.
Fix it. Fix it. Everything in the world can be fixed.
Your heart